Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Let's Move Austin. I'm your co-host, Chris Angel, and I'm here with Teresa Bastian. Hello, Teresa.
Hello, everybody.
Yay! We're talking about power of attorney today, which is super juicy because, as you described before I hit record, you have had some interesting situations in where power of attorney was required.
Yes, and it's very, very informative to complete a real estate transaction using a power of attorney for the buyer and or the seller and or both. And I think, after having several of these under my belt, it's time to share some information about how it works.
Yeah. Well, I asked you before we hit record, like what spurred this on? Like what made you think of power of attorney? And so maybe just share a couple instances where power of attorney, has to come into play.
Sure. So as I think in this digital age where we sign things with DocuSign, and I just got a new cell phone service plan the other day and did it all on the Visa screen. Real estate transactions still do require what's called wet signature. They need pen to paper.
Yep.
Sometimes in a real estate transaction, a person isn't physically present to put that pen to paper, or they're not able to. So one type of power of attorney is called property specific power of attorney.
Okay.
So in this situation, let's say husband and wife are buying a new home. As it turns out, on the day it's scheduled to be, signing, the husband has to go overseas for business. It's not practical for him to figure out the time change and whether he can take time away from his meeting to get to some lawyer in a foreign country. He would rather just give the limited power of attorney to his wife, then she can sign the papers in her name and on his behalf. Got it.
Okay.
So it simplifies things.
Yeah. Is it hard to get that type of property specific power of attorney? Like how do I?
No. In my experience, the title company that you're working with will already have the proper documentation. They will need to have that filled out and reviewed and approved by their attorneys ahead of time. So you don't want to do this the day before closing, spring it on people. If I would recommend at least a week's notice.
Okay.
And with property specific power of attorney, there's one other factor that is interesting, and sometimes people aren't aware of this. That traveling spouse would need to take a phone call from the title company on the same day the docs were signed, and that spouse has to verbally authorize that, yes, the power of attorney is still in effect.
Got it. Okay. So that does have to happen.
Yes. So it doesn't have to be the same exact time as, let's say, the other spouse is sitting there with the title agent, but at some point, that person needs to be able to get to a phone, contact the title company, and basically verify, yeah, they're still alive and they still want this in effect.
Yep.
If they don't do that, they literally cannot complete the transaction. They can't do the funding, even though the papers have been signed. So it's a pretty key thing not to forget at the last minute. Right.
I was made me think of when in a transaction, having a real estate agent who knows those things, right? Knows that, right? Because it's possible that you could have a real estate agent not knowing that, and then they didn't advise the client, hey, you should organize this. And then they don't, and then it doesn't close on time, and it's
that happens to be the day they're in the air for 12 hours or something. That would be
the whole thing.
It would mess it up. Yep. You want to hear the weirdest one of those situations I've had?
Yeah.
So I had one transaction where the seller was in jail. Well, I've had two, but this one, the seller was in jail.
Wow.
And not like a local jail, like state prison, hours away across Texas in an actual prison.
Wow.
So we had to arrange with the guard at the prison to allow this man to come and make a phone call that day.
Right. To say yes, like it's still okay or whatever.
Yes, I am so-and-so, and yes, I still authorize that power of attorney. Well, even getting that power of attorney was a nightmare because it had to go to one of his relatives or people that were on his visitor list.
I'm sure.
Because they had to sign. That one was a whole nother nightmare. But even in prison, you still have to take that call and verify.
Crazy.
So if you're in prison and you want to sell property, give me a call.
That's right. If you have a family member in prison and you need to sell your house, call Teresa. She knows how to advise.
But it's important to know that you can get things like that done. And in this case, it was so uncertain whether, being that it's a prison, if everything would follow through his plans. We had a couple contingency plans if that call didn't happen that day.
Yeah.
But anyway, it ended up to be successful.
That's another, I'm going to keep tooting your horn because I feel like that's another thing. Like when you have agents who have enough years in the business to think ahead of what are my contingencies if this doesn't go. A lot of times when you've got new agents, they may be good at heart, but if just lacking the experience, you don't know how to plan for and create contingencies around all the things that can get screwed up.
Well, I think there's another factor too, that yes, experience, you know, I have a lot of tools in my toolbox of things and strategies, but also a temperament. You know, after doing real estate this long, it's pretty hard for me to get upset or worked up or frustrated with the transaction. I feel like I immediately go into, well, what's the solution and what's my problem solving approach?
Right.
And that was not always the case for me. It was easier to rattle me when I was earlier in the business. And now it's just like, okay, well, how do we get through it? How do we get through it?
Right. Yeah. I always tell people, I think that's why technology at some point won't replace the agent. Like maybe there'll be a percentage of things that can go that way, but I think there will always be people who want to have a human who knows how to create contingency plans, because real estate transactions are way more complicated than people think.
Yeah, they really are. For example, last week I had a closing. I represented the buyers in this case. One buyer lived in California. Another buyer lives in DC, Maryland area. They both traveled. They're not related. Okay, they're childhood friends. They both traveled to Austin to pick out an investment property that one of their daughters will live in here in Austin.
Wow.
So that was great. And we house hunted and had a great time together. But then everybody went home, and 30 days later, it was time to sign the papers to buy the house. What do we do?
Right.
In this case, we could have mailed papers back and forth from coast to coast and tried to get this all done in time. The trust level was very high here. So instead, we just did that limited scope power of attorney. Both buyers granted the daughter here in Austin, who's not on the house, not on the loan, but they granted her the power of attorney. So she sat there for an hour and signed all the papers. And we FaceTimed the buyers on both coasts during it. And they both had to verify. But it prevented them from having to do this shuffle of FedExes. And it was a much smoother transaction for that, because you just knew everything was going to happen on this day the way it should.
Right. That's cool.
So it's a great option that I don't think people often remember you can do. It doesn't mean this daughter in Austin had power of attorney over all of their affairs. It's literally just this transaction. Yeah.
That's so good. Okay. And that is called
limited power of attorney.
Limited power of attorney. Okay, got it. So
I like to also describe it as property specific power of attorney.
Got it. Yeah. That was the word I was thinking of. Property specific. Okay. I like it. Are there other powers of attorney that we need to know about?
There sure are. There's the more traditional power of attorney, which many of us are familiar with or should be familiar with. Please, if you have not completed a will, please go do that for your family's sake. But many times I work with multi-generational situations. Say the older generation is going into nursing home, or they're leaving their home after so many years. It may be that they're experiencing some dementia or medical fragility. It may be that it's just physically difficult to get them into a title company to sign. In a situation like that, they may have a power of attorney already in place that allows maybe their son or their daughter to make those medical decisions that many of us are familiar with the power of attorney for. If it's a full power of attorney already in effect, that child or whoever has it is already authorized to sign documents on this principal's behalf. So that can make it a lot easier for someone that's getting up in years and it's either hard to get around or, you're not confident they understand the documents mentally. Always want to go with the other person that has the power of attorney.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Good. Are there more? Is there more you want to say about that one, or are there other ones that?
Well, I was going to say because you kind of caused my thoughts to wander at some of the most unusual transactions we've had. we did have one earlier this year. It was one of my agents, and I stepped in to kind of help facilitate. The mom and the older couple had left their home to go to assisted living. And while we had the house under contract, we were about 3 weeks for closing, one of the spouses passed away.
Oh, wow.
And so that, as you can imagine, that's probably its own topic, but even with a will in place, we were not going to be able to make the timeline, and we had to negotiate through that so that the estate could be probated and there could be permission given to sell the house.
Wow.
So
What happened? Did you have to extend the transaction?
We did. We extended the closing date. The buyers incurred some additional costs because they had to relock their loan. So the sellers agreed to pay those additional costs, and the buyers obviously agreed to be patient. So we worked it out.
Wow, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, technology. What are you going to do when that happens? Like having
and just to have the trust built up and the communication built up to guide the family through thinking about a house sale when now their priorities were in a wildly different place. It really brought home to me how much trust and value I can bring to somebody, because instead of just throwing up their hands and saying, well, now we have to start over, and they were able to focus on the funeral and caring for the rest of their family. And this, I just kind of handled off in the background and made sure it happened for them.
Right. Yeah.
So it was very meaningful, really.
Do they take, so the property specific doesn't take much time. It's a piece of paper that the title company will give you to sign.
Yeah. Typically, each title company, they already work with attorneys, so they have their own that their attorney has drawn up, and then we just bring it back signed. They do need to have the actual wet signature, so you can give them a copy of it DocuSign, but you have to get the original in the mail. With the full power of attorney, because the title company doesn't draw that up, that's from an individual, maybe their lawyer drew it up or however they got it. The title company does need to have a copy of the entire power of attorney document, because then their attorneys will review it, ensure the validity of it before they can move on. So when there's a full power of attorney in play, I recommend at least 2 weeks before closing, because there can be questions back and forth.
Right. I was gonna say it would probably take a little bit longer to create that.
And generally, if you're mid real estate transaction and you realize, oh, we're going to be traveling that day, or my wife is being deployed, I would not recommend you get a full power of attorney to address that issue. There's a lot that goes into that, a lot of determinations and questions, and usually when people are already buying a house or getting deployed, there's enough going on. Anything I would guide a client to do would be related to that property specific. It's only if they come to me with a whole power of attorney, then I would make sure that gets to the title company. But I can't really advise on an entire power of attorney.
Yeah, got it. Are there any other oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Want to know another fun fact?
Yeah.
Let's say you're buying a house, and whoopsie doodle, the closing date is when you're going to be in Italy on a magical 10-day trip through Tuscany. No big deal. You figure you can find someone there. Surely you can sign the papers in Italy. Oh, no. You know where you sign papers if you want to be the principal of your real estate transaction in another country?
Where?
The embassy.
Oh.
So you would have to leave Tuscany and find an Italian embassy to do that transaction.
A U.S. embassy in Italy or an Italian embassy? Well, they wouldn't have an Italian embassy.
A U.S. embassy. So if you're in any other country, you have to do a real estate deal.
Wow.
You have to be in the U.S. embassy of that country.
Wow.
So you can't just go find a notary. No. So if there's any kind of international travel, or you're on an oil rig, or out in the oil field or something, no. Limited power of attorney. We're not going to embassies to close transactions.
Yeah, that's good. I like this for the whole purpose of planning purposes. I think sometimes there's more to planning the sale of your house, for example, than just calling somebody up and saying, yeah, we're ready to list it, and then not considering what else is happening in your life at the time. I mean, I really like
Well, and sometimes the best laid plans don't work out. And you knew you wanted to move this spring, but the dream house came on the market and you were able to get it at the right price. You can't always plan it, but we can know how to shuffle it to make sure it happens.
Right.
Even if it's not the best situation. Like you might have liked to be there in person to sign the papers, but at least this way you get your house.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. That's
just
so
a tool in the toolbox.
Are there other powers of attorney that are important, or does that pretty much cover it?
There may be in other areas of the entire world. I cannot be an expert on everything, Chris, but in terms of what I can help with, this is what we have.
I like it. So to answer the question, when do we use the power of attorney? Let's just think, what's the succinct answer to how do we know when to use?
If the sellers are in separate locations and they want to facilitate it being easier, or the buyers, if one party is traveling in a foreign country, somehow deployed or restricted in their travel where they can't promise they could be at an appointment at a certain time, or the principal is infirm or medically fragile or doesn't really have the faculty to sign papers on their own behalf anymore.
Yeah. Got it. I love it. It's so good. It's so good. Life still happens. Yeah. And in the middle of life happening, we can still get transactions done through tools like powers of attorney, power of attorney. I love it. Good stuff, Teresa. Thanks for always knowing what's up and how to navigate the
I like to say, and a lot of things I've done it the hard way, so now you can do it the easy way.
Right. Exactly. That's so good. Awesome. Well, thanks, Teresa, for a great episode. If people want to reach out to you and learn more about what you do in real estate or connect with you about their buying and selling wishes.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk to y'all. You can call me or text 512-297-3442. And I think my website is going to be on the screen, but it's www.letsmoveaustin.com.
Love it. So good. Okay, Teresa, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Bye.